Joining me is Cameron Milner, who's worked on 33 Labor election campaigns, including Bill Shorten's 6 years ago. He's a former Queensland Labor Secretary. Cameron Milner, it's always great to get your insights. Labor effectively cannot govern without the Greens' support in the Senate. How do you think that's going to work out?
Well, I think at the opening of the program you said that Labor wasn't going to get a majority in the lower house. I think the count that's going on tonight shows they'll get to 77 or 78 seats. So I think we're dealing with a Labor majority in the lower house. And the Senate, it's been like that ever since Labor was in government for the last 20 or 30 years. Labor hasn't had the ability to, without minor parties or crossbench support, navigate legislation through. The same way that Josh Frydenberg had to go to Pauline Hanson every time he needed a piece of legislation passed in the last Senate. Political parties are adept at dealing with minor parties and crossbenchers in the Senate, and that's been the makeup of our Australian politics for a very long time, and I don't see much difference. I don't see the Greens opposing our childcare measures. I don't see them opposing free TAFE. There's a whole range of Labor policies that we will go to the election on and that we'll mandate it for and will push through Parliament that I don't think the Greens or indeed even the Liberals will oppose in the Senate.
Look, Cameron, some of that's absolutely correct. I think what I'm saying is this Senate is going to be all accelerated, no break, right? All accelerated, no break. Some policies, Labor policies that people like, great, but it will not be able to back off, say, on spending and all that without having real serious problems with the Greens. And the difference in the past is like you take the Morrison government, for instance. It had different combinations of senators, crossbenchers, it could work on to get something through the Senate. The Labor has only the Greens, either the Liberals or the Greens. That's the crucial difference. They don't have an alternative. It's the Greens or nothing.
I think the Greens will be there, but depending on the final Senate numbers, I think David Pocock may get up in the ACT. I suspect Jackie Lambie gets a partner as well. So it won't just be the Greens and Labor, as I understand the Senate, given those numbers.
No,
it may well be some other crossbenchers as well.
Yeah, that makes it worse. What I'm saying is, anytime the Liberals say no, they must have the Greens. They can't negotiate around the Greens. They must have the Greens. And, as I wrote in my column this morning, probably Jackie Lambie and her extra senator, if that works out, or David Pocock, who's even further to the left on global warming. That's what I'm saying. It's all accelerated. It's no break.
Or you have a situation where passage of legislation simply doesn't pass. I mean, Labor has to navigate the price which they want to pay to the Greens for the passage of every piece of legislation. And given that we've got a mandate for what was a modest and reasonable program we put before the Australian people, many of which I think are immensely popular and great ideas for Australia going forward, I'm not sure what the big conundrum point will be in the Senate in terms of getting Labor's agenda that they took to the people only 10 days ago through the Senate.
Well, I mentioned one thing. In 3 years from now, we are going to need severe spending cuts. I mean, we can't keep spending like this. We might get lucky. Something might fall out of a clear blue sky. But there's going to need to be some very tough economic decisions made. That is where you're going to see conflict and possibly also in global warming as well. I just throw that out there. It's all hypothetical because, as you say, right now, we've been told very little about what Labor wants to do. But when it hits the fan, we shall see.
Well, Jim Chalmers is bringing down a budget in a few months' time, so we'll absolutely see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, in fact, they're going to have a summit with the employers and unions to see what to do. So that is when we'll also see, and that's going to happen before Christmas. Now, I was very surprised by Albanese's victory speech on Saturday night, Cameron. Now, for a start, he did not mention once cost of living, which I thought for most Australians probably the issue in this election, cost of living. He didn't mention that once. Instead, the two big issues he singled out were what I consider mainly symbolic ones that the upper middle class now really go for. You do more to fight global warming, which means taking action that nobody's actually going to notice when it comes to the climate itself. And the other was to change the constitutions to give Aborigines a kind of advisory parliament just for them. These priorities from a Labor government, mentioning them, not mentioning cost of living, did they surprise you?
No, it didn't, because we mentioned cost of living every other day of the election campaign, and on election nights it's there for the leader to give a personal view as the incoming Prime Minister as to what his policy priorities are. So I thought Albo gave a great speech. I think he gave a very impassioned speech, and he has ever since, going to Quad today and the like, he's leading as a great Prime Minister and showing the way as being someone who wants to build consensus and take people with you on that journey.
Yeah, well, Cameron, as I've said, I said it before the election as well, I actually like him, and I think he means it. And a lot of Liberal voters didn't want to hear this, but I think he will represent a kind of integrity. He will try to get civility in politics. And on those 2 points, I think a lot of people will be cheering him on from both sides of politics. So I wish him the best on those 2 in particular. What kind of Prime Minister do you think is going to be?
Well, I think we're going to have someone who's got a lot of experience in Parliament, someone who has been the leader of the House when Labor didn't have the numbers, so is very adept at dealing with a very large crossbench, which we're dealing with in the current Parliament, even though Labor will have the numbers to pass legislation in the lower house. But we are coming into economic uncertain times. I think if you look at any of the economists, they're talking about rising inflation. We know the RBA are talking about 8 interest rate rises in this next term of government. We are dealing with a much more difficult economic headwind than perhaps in a long time for Australia. We borrowed to fix COVID and the pandemic, but right now, as you say, we'll have far less leverage to do with that in terms of the budget. And that will require really strong leadership and leadership for the nation because of the sorts of things we're facing with the uncertain economic times, both here in Australia, but also globally.
I think you put your finger right on the challenges in front of him, and it will test his diplomatic skills sure as hell. Karen Milner, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.